I get into this debate with folks frequently about whether or not leaders are born or made, and I definitely think they're made. I don't believe anyone is born. Maybe you're born with a particular characteristic that enhances your ability to be a good leader, but in terms of the experiences, my leadership experiences, I like to put up against. I'd say that I've had some pretty impactful experiences that continue to make me a better leader day in and day out moving forward. And so it's one of those things where if you haven't had the experience of leading, you don't know whether or not you'd be a good leader. And you definitely don't know if you're a good leader if you haven't had any failures or leadership, foibles, if you will. So definitely experience matters. And the more reps you can get, harkening back to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000, the more reps you can get at anything, the better you're ultimately going to become at that particular task.
MK, when we chatted, I was really impressed by your career, time in the Marines, long time in the FBI, doing a variety of things. Quite an impressive resume. You were working on cyber crimes, organized crime, terrorism, all the bad guys out there that we're worried about.
Yeah, I had an amazing career in the FBI, 22 years, and I'm one of the people who came out on the other end of that, feeling as though I got an opportunity to do everything that I signed up for and everything that the experience turned out to.
Well, very impressive. And then from there, you went on. You were a CISO, working in a couple of very large firms that we know, and now you've embarked on a solo career or a career of building a business of your own boutique consulting
Right.
firm. So, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure congratulations are in order. It's one of those things, be careful what you wish for. I've signed up to be my own boss, very much interested in seeing if I can pull this thing off. I feel like I have a tremendous amount of experience that covers the enterprise risk spectrum, hence the advisory firm in the enterprise risk space. And I'm hoping that we can deliver some impact to small to medium-sized businesses and public sector entities.
Well, you've taken the leap, MK. You've jumped off the cliff to
Yes.
get.
I have. I've burned my ships at the shore, as it were.
Well, you've had such an interesting background, but I want to go way back, MK, if we could, to your childhood.
Sure.
I'd love to start there. I'm always fascinated by our upbringings and what forms us. So, could you tell us a little bit about growing up? What was it like for you? Where did you grow up, and what were some of the early childhood memories?
Yeah, born and raised in Washington D.C., and I had a wonderful childhood filled with the usual things, neighborhood friends and family activities. My parents did get divorced when I was very young, but I have very strong and I believe to be impactful to this day memories of lessons taught to me by my parents, specifically my father, around the subject of leadership. And I remember distinctly his prodding to me that being a leader in every facet of life was the most important thing that I could do, as both a young person and a future adult. And I remember him having conversations with me at a very, very young age, as if I were much older, telling me about the importance of it, how you carry yourself, the things in terms of characteristics that were important. And I definitely feel like those conversations planted a seed, because leadership has been at the core of everything that I've done professionally throughout my life. And it's always been thematically one of the things that I've used as sort of my North Star as to whether or not I'm engaged in something that's a good use of my time, so to speak. I always see myself as a leader, always thought of myself as how can I be impactful and helpful in the ways that of the things that I'm good at, and leadership skills are part of my concentration. It's a discipline that I've paid attention to. I don't believe that there are such things as leadership experts, but my dad definitely planted the seed that I could be good at leadership. And it was that sort of idea that I think, if I'm thankful to my parents for many, many things, but one of the things collectively I'm thankful for is that not once did my parents, both of them, ever tell me that there was something that I wasn't capable of doing, or something that was prohibited to me in terms of dreaming or aspirationally things that I wanted to do. They were always that sounds great, get it done. Those things are available to you as long as you're willing to do the hard work. As evidence, when my mom was a single parent after my parents' divorce, raising three boys, I saw her grit and resilience shine through. Just getting stuff done has been a part of my the example I saw in her and the example that I take into the world. It's one of the things I think is has made me successful over the years. I have a very, very strong sense of um, getting stuff accomplished in the environments that I'm working in, and I definitely feel like I get that from my parents.
Yeah, that was ground into it, sounds like, at a very young age through
Yeah,
good example.
absolutely.
I'm curious, MK, what's the earliest memory you have of your dad having that leadership conversation with you? Do you remember how old you were?
All, Yeah, people don't believe this when I talk. I mean, my dad used to talk to me like I was a young man when I was 5 or 6 years old. He would talk to me in a way that he bypassed what might be considered child or baby talk, and he just had conversations with me about very adult topics and things. Because I don't know, maybe he just assumed that I would take away what I needed to take away. The earliest conversation on leadership. I was a big fan of and still am NFL football as a young kid. He noticed that. I couldn't have been much more than 6 or 7 years old. Told my dad I wanted to be a running back in the NFL when I grow up. You know, he turns to me and says, "Why don't you want to be the quarterback? The quarterback's the leader of the team. That's the position you should be thinking of. That's the position where the captain on the field that takes the team up and down the field to score the points. That's the brains of the operation. That's the position you should aspire to." And it was his retort or that conversation which then had me lock in on a childhood idol of mine, Roger Staubach, who's this guy champion, the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys in the '70s. I saw this, and with my father's, sort of prodding, he became an idol of mine. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a quarterback in the NFL, and I'm still a fan of his to this day. But the little conversations like that, where he's taking a concept that I give to him, and then he's providing his own twist to it. And the twist was always be confident in yourself. Make sure that you understand that your thoughts matter. Take the leap to be in charge. Don't let other people be in charge. And I've story after story, my time at Annapolis, the U.S. Naval Academy, my time in the Marines, my time in the FBI, and my time in corporate America has all been a manifestation of those early ideas of what it means to step forward and take control and take charge and make sure that I'm not just waiting for someone else to do those things.
It makes me think about the conversations I'm having with my grandson
Yeah.
and the different conversations I could be having and approaching it differently.
Yeah, they hear you for sure. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things I certainly took on as a parent. I don't think I was I don't think I was as effective as my dad as my dad was, although that's yet to be seen. I have
Yeah.
3 children, but his approach was definitely not something that I think was normal for the day. And again, completely bypassed this idea that young kids can't accept difficult concepts. And that's believe it or not, that's what led me. I wrote a book some years ago, a very sort of a short book on leadership it's called Leadership for Youngsters.
Hmm.
And it's meant to be directed at young people because I think the concept of leadership is something that can be introduced at a very, very early stage. I think we wait too long to talk about what it means to be a leader for young children. And I'm a direct example of how early you can start those conversations and have it have impact on people.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get back to that later on, MK. But going back to your childhood, so you had dreams of becoming a quarterback, but when did the dream of joining the Marines step in? Was that early on as well?
So let me tell you how linear my thought process was. So Roger Staubach, again, my idol. They used to have the football cards back in the day.
Oh,
On
yeah.
the back of his card, it had his college, U.S. Naval Academy. I had never heard of the U.S. Naval Academy until I saw that. In elementary school, because I had, in addition to becoming a quarterback, I had dreams of potentially being an astronaut and doing some other things. I had done my research and figured out that the vast majority of the astronauts in the astronaut corps came from the U.S. Naval Academy, and I think to this day that's still the number one source of astronauts, or at least leading in the field of
Yeah.
the variety of places where astronauts come from. So in my mind, okay, I need to become a pilot. I need to serve in the U.S. Navy potentially, and the U.S. Naval Academy is the route to do that. And so before I was finished with elementary school, I had my sights set on attending the U.S. Naval Academy. I look back on that and I think about the audacity of a young kid in Washington D.C. who, living 30 minutes away from Annapolis, had never seen Annapolis, but had set my sights on it that I was going to go to school there, college. So I'm already thinking about college and elementary school, and I'm voraciously digesting anything having to do with the U.S. Navy at the time. My first book that I remember picking up on my own. My dad made me read a lot of books, so made me read is the difference between what he made me read and what I picked up on my own. And the first book I remember picking up on my own in elementary school was a book about the Battle of Midway. And I read that book from end to end, and it was interesting because it's this thick book that has sort of this recounting of this battle that happens in the Pacific during World War II. And I just became fascinated with the idea of service and being in service to the nation. So much so that to this day I still have an affinity, fascination for the Greatest Generation, what happened during World War II. The country becoming galvanized around battling for our ideals and
Mm.
things like that. And I soaked all of that in. I was definitely at an early age purveyor of military might. Like I would get my mom to buy me books that we would go into the bookstores of the day, and I would buy. I remember this book called The U.S. War Machine. You can Google that term and look it up. There was this book, and it was a compendium of all of the planes, platforms, ships, armament of the U.S. military, and I just devoured this stuff. And all of that over the years, basically added to this idea that I was going to at some point serve. So the idea of service to the country was always part of my plan. As I think I told you in our pre-conversation, it gets to my senior year in high school. I only applied to 2 colleges as a senior in high school, and I went to a really, really good high school that was to prepare people for college preparatory. But I told my counselor, I said, "There's only one place I'm interested in going to school. I'll apply to this other place as a backup," and that was the U.S. Naval Academy in West Point. West Point was my backup, and I'm lucky that I got into both of them because I just, again, the audacity of it. I was so hyper focused on that, attending school there, that everything that I did was in preparation for that. Everything that I did in high school was in preparation for it. Oddly enough, with the scores and grades that I had, I couldn't get in today. The challenge of getting into the U.S. Service Academies today is so much higher than what it was when I matriculated through high school. But I'm grateful to have had that experience and lucky enough to have attended.
Awesome. Did you know that you wanted to go into the Marines, or you just knew that you wanted to get in the academy and then figure out what
Yeah,
would
no,
come
I
next?
knew I knew I wanted to get into the academy, and the Marines is like a little bit of a calling. It kind of comes to you naturally. When you're in the environment where everyone is intending to serve, you start to outline for yourself like what makes the most sense for your personality, your ambition, your goals. And part of a thing that I've carried with me throughout my life is I always want to be challenged. I always want to do kind of the path less traveled or the harder thing. And so the Marine Corps, very early on in my 4 years at Annapolis, started to take shape as the harder path and the path that I wanted to expose myself to and something that I wanted to be a part of. And so made the decision to become a United States Marine. And there were some things I had to do before I graduated, like attend Marine Corps Officer Candidate School during one of the summers at Annapolis. And that's to this day the hardest thing I've ever done physically. It was like, just this 6 weeks of challenging in an officer's candidate school environment, and you getting yelled at by DIs and all that kind of stuff, and run around the woods of Quantico with logs and learning to shoot and learning how to operate as essentially as an infantry Marine in the U.S. Marine Corps. And it was definitely a sort of mind-bending experience that left an impact on me, and happy to this day that I chose Marines. And only a small percentage of the Academy grads each year choose the Marines. And I'm oftentimes still amazed that people don't know that the U.S. Marine Corps is a part of the Department of the Navy. So when you graduate from Annapolis, you get the option to choose whether or not you want to be commissioned as an ensign or second lieutenant in the Marines.
It's a pretty small percentage. Do you know how small?
Yeah, when I graduated, the percentage was actually capped at 16%.
Hmm.
So, using rough numbers, a class of 1,000 people, only 160 would become Marines. I think they removed that cap since, but I don't think that the percentage ever rises much above like 20%. I would be surprised if it was much higher than that. So a
Yeah.
small percentage of each class decides to become Marine officers. And we're a pretty tight knit group, as you might imagine. For those of
Yeah.
us who are already part of this club, we're part of an even smaller club that decided while we were there that we wanted to be Marine officers.
And you're always a Marine, right? Doesn't matter if you've
Absolutely,
moved
absolutely.
on.
My wife,
Yeah.
my wife is sick of it. She, I've been, I've been out of the Marine Corps technically since 1997, and it's still a part of who I am for sure.
Yeah. So you reach your dream of becoming a Marine. Then 5 years later, you decide to jump out and do something else and join the FBI. What drove that decision?
Yeah, it's another example, I think, of one. I wanted to continue the idea of service, and I wanted to do something that was more immediate. I know this might sound odd to people, but during times of relative peace, especially in the U.S. military, you can get the idea that maybe you're not testing yourself or you're not seeing everything that it's possible or possible for you to see. And I got wrapped around this idea of continuing my service, but I wanted to do something that was, I thought, more immediately impactful. And so I only looked at the FBI, and I showed some interest with an applicant recruiter when I was stationed in San Diego as a Marine, and that interest was immediately returned. And the next thing you know, 9 months later, I was out of the Marine Corps. I had a week to take my orders from the Marines and drive back across country and start training as a special agent in the FBI back at Quantico. So it was and a near immediate jump. And to this day, 9 months in terms of the start to finish getting a class date is pretty fast. But at the time, the FBI was doing heavy recruiting of military officers into the special agent ranks.
What's the biggest difference that you found serving in the FBI versus the Marines?
Oh, there's a huge difference. Most people think of the FBI as a paramilitary organization. Nothing could be further from the truth. The FBI is a very professional organization, filled with accountants, attorneys, computer scientists, folks like myself from military and law enforcement backgrounds. But the atmosphere is very much a professional one. You're wearing a suit most days to work and out there professionally representing the U.S. government in terms of your investigations. I had to, even in that environment, go do some other things like join a couple of the FBI SWAT teams to sort of scratch that itch of again, the immediacy of the law enforcement profession. But the biggest difference is the Marines, I think, again, and the history has proven itself. 250 plus years of Marine Corps history. It's like the Marines is much more of a stamp on your mind. I think of myself, and probably will to the end of my days, as a United States Marine, whereas the FBI as a profession is something that I did for 22 years. And once you're done with it, there's not a whole lot for you to cling on to. You get the retirement, creds, and you get a plaque that you get to put on the wall. But you don't walk around telling people, "Hey, I'm a retired FBI agent," but I'll tell anyone that I meet that I'm a that I'm a United States Marine. So I think that the imprint on the brain is a little bit more permanent with the Marines.
Yeah.
But FBI, very professional organization during my tenure in there, and met some wonderful people, got a chance to do some amazing things. But there's definitely a beginning and end to that. Whereas with the Marines, I don't feel like there was an end.
Both of those experiences, and even in the boot camps, so officer training that you went through, what were some of the toughest moments that you can talk about? I'm sure you have some tough moments you probably
Yeah.
can't share in the FBI, but what were some really gritty ones that really challenged you and tested you?
In any of the training environment, I've been in numerous training environments between the Marines and the FBI. Like I said, I had the privilege of serving on two FBI SWAT teams, and even just the process of becoming a special agent. At the time, it was 16 weeks of training at Quantico. The experiences that stick are the ones where I failed. The experiences where I didn't either react in a way that I thought I should be capable of reacting, or one where I was told that something that I did not meet the standard, or might be considered the wrong decision. And those are the kinds of things in the training environment that stick with you. You know, the Marine Corps is all about pushing the body and mind. So I definitely remember times where my body was pushed to its limits. I had a very similar experience in the FBI and in training environments, definitely for the process of SWAT. But anytime that you train for something and you miss the mark, it's like, wow, I got to go back to the drawing board. And there are numerous instances where, my first year trying out for the SWAT team in FBI Los Angeles, I didn't make it. I missed a time or cutoff on a particular evolution and event, and had to wait a whole year to try out for that team again. So you have a year to sit within your failure. You have a year to sit within the fact that you didn't make something that you worked real hard to make, and so you got to train. Now you've seen a snapshot of what the test looks like. You've seen the test. You failed it the first time. Now you got to go back and figure out how to meet the mark on the test. And those can be difficult periods. You spend a year trying to make sure that you're doing all the things that you necessarily need to do in order to do better the next go around. And those are good life lessons because not everything's going to pan out immediately the way that you plan on. And if you're lucky, you get an opportunity to not make those same mistakes over again. And I tell people time and again, especially people that I mentor, that, mistakes are going to happen. Failures are going to happen. The difference is what you learn from those and what you take from those experiences moving forward is the value of having gone through that experience. And if you can take a failure and turn it into something that you've learned from and ensure that you never make those mistakes again, or at least try very hard not to, then there's value in it. And you learn much more from mistakes any day of the week than you do positive things. I can't remember all the positive things that I've done, the accolades or the awards that I've gotten, but I definitely remember most of the things that stung really hard, where I missed the mark.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about that. The areas that you failed, were they just so demanding physically, or was it a skill component to it, or a combination?
Yeah, it's sometimes a combination of both. Being physically, the military and law enforcement has components of it that are just extremely physically demanding, and they're meant to be that way so that you can separate people from, separate the core group because you're dealing with again a high value core group, people who have characteristics that you think you may want, but the physical part is the part you can't plan for. You just don't know how hard something in real life is going to be. So you hold a pretty high standard in terms of physical capabilities. And if folks meet that mark, then you know that at the very least they have the tools to be able to live through in a resilient fashion those kinds of unexpected, physically demanding and physically challenging times. And they definitely happen in the real world. And you're happy that you've gone through those physically demanding experiences, because then you know what you're made of and you know what you're capable of surviving. And it's an important mental concept to understand what you're capable of surviving, because I think studies have shown that in many critical incidents, part of the challenge for people is the belief of whether or not they're going to make it through those challenges. And if you've done really hard things and you're presented with a real life challenge, you immediately can assess for yourself, well, I've been through tougher things than this. I'm pretty sure I'm going to make it through this. I just need to, do X, Y, or Z, or make sure that I lean in on some aspect of the challenge. But there's definitely, there's psychological science associated with it, and it definitely is true. Well, once you've gone through some really, really hard things, you know what you're capable of doing. I tell people, at the Naval Academy, I was on the boxing team for a couple of years, and boxing's an interesting sport. I'm not necessarily a fan of the physical impact and trauma that's caused in professional boxing, but I can tell you that if you've stepped in a ring with someone and you've been punched in the face before, you go through life differently, understanding what it feels like to be punched in the face or to lose the wind in your lungs, to be completely unwinded because someone's punched you in the gut. And if you've done that and survived it and had to go into the next round, I remember a training session in boxing where a much better fighter than me took my wind, punched me in the gut, and I didn't stiffen up my abdomen. And he caught me at an odd moment, and I remember being unwinded, and I went down and basically bent over my knees. I'm expecting the coach to help me as he's watching this match. You know what the coach does? He blows his whistle, draws attention to the rest of everyone else practicing in the ring. He says, hey, blows the whistle and he says, hey, pay attention to this, folks. Body blow. This is what a body blow can do to you. So stop trying to punch people in the face all the time. Go for those body blows because it can stop a fighter in their tracks. And I would on that day, I was the example of what it meant to get a body blow that you were unprepared for. It's things like that, which is an interesting thing. Most people, if you were to ask them, have never been in a fight. They've never been in a situation where they've had to physically maintain themselves, their bearing, occupy their own space, and protect themselves. And it's an interesting, valuable thing to go through life with if you've been in a tussle before, if you've
Hmm.
been in a real life circumstance where someone's trying to hurt you, and you have to either defend yourself or go on the offensive. It's a whole different mentality, and it
Yeah.
gives you a different perspective of how to go through other things in life. It definitely makes you stronger. So I'm always appreciative of having those experiences like that.
Yeah, you're bringing back memories, MK. I remember my first fight in grade school, and I did not win, MK. I did not win that one. And I think the first time I remember getting the wind knocked out of me was in junior high in flag football. And I had this friend, Dennis Swanson, and he was much bigger than me. And I don't know why, I thought I could run through him. I thought, I'm not going to go around him. I'm just going to slam right into Dennis. And I slammed so hard and
Yeah.
just fell flat on my back, wind totally knocked out of me. So another life lesson there, I
Yeah,
guess.
I'm you remember that to this day because it's an impactful experience. Most people have never experienced that, nor have they experienced the need to then go on after that kind of experience. I think about one of the training things that we did in the FBI. Pepper spray has been around for a number of years, and most people, thankfully, have never experienced what it's like to be pepper sprayed. One of the exercises they did during among the hundreds of things you do during FBI training is they spray you in the face with pepper spray, and then they make you go through a scenario where you have to recover yourself. Because what happens if the bad guy, is carrying pepper spray and sprays you, yet you're in a situation where you got to fight for your life? If you've never experienced that before, you might react in a way that's not helpful to you. So one of the things the FBI does is make sure you understand what it means to operate in an adverse environment. In other words, you don't have the upper hand. You've been somehow wounded, or something's been taken away from
Hmm.
you that you think might be a tool for you and has been used against you. So what now? How do you operate now? And just having that kind of mentality puts you on the affirmative around, okay, I have this challenge, but I need to work my way through the problem. I got to work the problem, and I got to keep working the problem until I'm safe.
Yeah. I'm fascinated too by the side of grit, nature versus nurture. And is it something that
Yeah.
we're born with or develop? But you've given so many examples of how you've developed that grit, through
Yeah,
failures, through these
yeah,
trials.
yeah. I'm a big believer in the nurture aspect of that debate. I think that the result we are the result of our experiences. And to the degree that you can provide access and experience to people, I think there's very few things that can't be taught, or at the very least taught to a degree that's acceptable. Again, I'm a leadership student. I get into this debate with folks frequently about whether or not leaders are born or made. And I definitely think they're made. I don't believe anyone is born. Maybe you're born with a particular characteristic that enhances your ability to be a good leader. But in terms of the experiences, my leadership experiences, I like to put up against the field. I'd say that I've had some pretty impactful experiences that continue to make me a better leader day in and day out moving forward. And so it's one of those things where if you haven't had the experience of leading, you don't know whether or not you'd be a good leader, and you definitely don't know if you're a good leader if you haven't had any failures, or leadership, foibles, if you will. So definitely experience matters, and the more reps you can get, harkening back to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000, the more reps you can get at anything, the better you're ultimately going to become at that particular task.
Yeah, and the voices your parents and your dad put in your head early on had to have made a huge difference too. Just setting that vision in your head that you could be a leader.
Yeah,
at such a
absolutely.
son.
Again, yeah,
Yeah.
again, I don't remember a time where either of my parents gave me the wave off or told me that there was something I was going to be incapable of accomplishing. In fact, they were the opposite. I think they always had very high aspirational hopes for me, and part of their way of seeing that through was to continue to reinforce this idea that I was capable with work, with the hard work involved, to accomplish anything I wanted to accomplish.
Did you ever hear their voices in your head when you were in some of those really hard moments?
I don't think I heard their voices in my head, but I've always been respectful and cognizant of the seeds that they planted, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, I'm going to take a little shift here, MK, and I've got a rapid fire round for you.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And
Let's do it.
just say whatever comes to mind. What and this shifts a little bit onto the business side. So you went from Marines to FBI to business. What was your boldest business risk?
My boldest business risk was starting my own advisory firm. I left a pretty comfortable compensation package at a Fortune 500 company in order to start my own business. And I it was composed of a couple different things. One, I felt like I had the experience, so I had the reps that were at least the foundational pieces that could make a business successful. I felt like I had enough experience in the way of customer interactions to understand what customers are looking for, or at least the starting points of those conversations. And I thought that I could develop a service line that might be helpful to answering some of the things that they thought were important to them. And so my boldest decision to date definitely is walking away from sort of the corporate structure to build my own thing.
What's harder, getting sprayed in the face with pepper spray or starting your own business?
That's a great question. I might put them on the same I might put them on the same line. I can't tell you the number of days I've ended as a new business owner thinking to myself, boy, I really screwed this one up. I might have made the wrong decision. But it ebbs and flows. It goes up and down. Like some days I'm just super, super grateful that I'm actually even at a point professionally to be able to explore something like this. It's something I've always wanted to do, so I get to do that. So I have to be respectful of the decisions I've made up to this point that even allow me to be in a position to do this. And is it hard? Absolutely, but nothing that I've ever done and been successful at has been easy. So my expectation is that as long as I continue to lean into this, do the right things, that it's going to pay off and it's going to be successful as well. I have every anticipation that it will.
Absolutely. What's your morning routine in one word?
Coffee. I gotta get I gotta get a couple of cups of coffee in me before I do anything. It's been my go-to for really, really long period of time. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that first those first couple of sips. But I like to start off the day. I feel my fresh, probably like a lot of people. I feel like my real productivity hours lie somewhere between 7:30 a.m. and probably 2:30 in the afternoon. So the bulk of things that I'm going to do in any one particular day happen between those hours, because after 2:30, especially in a complete remote environment, you start getting pulled away by, the other duties in your life. And then maybe there's some, I'm pretty into exercise. So maybe there's a run I want to go for. Sometimes I do that at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I'll go out and go for an hour run. And then my day starts to wind down in that. Although I always have the laptop open and I'm always doing something, it becomes less focused than maybe it was in the earlier part of the day. So
Yeah.
getting that first cup of coffee in and then figuring out what needs to get done today is how I start each day.
What's one value you won't compromise on?
Integrity. It's been at the core of my life and professional life for as long as I can remember. And one of the concepts they hammer in with you at the Naval Academy is this very, very basic concept that if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. Integrity is everything, and I think if it were as important to more people, things would be much better off. Like I can't compromise my integrity. It's one of the reasons why there's certain professions I think I probably would not be so good at.
You know, something that surprised me having this conversation with more people lately on the topic of integrity is how many people have had a similar experience that I had. So when I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. I was really, really young. My mom took me to the grocery store, Safeway, and they had this bulk candy, and candy would fall over onto the floor. So I thought that was, fair grabs, finders keepers. So I was filling up my
Right.
pockets with this candy that had fallen on the floor. And we get home and I'm unloading my pockets, all happy with all this candy I got. Of course, my mom sees it and she's like, Robert, what are you doing? And she marches me back to the car, drives me back to Safeway, and I have to go apologize to the manager of the store
Yeah.
for stealing the candy. And I've heard so many people who have a story like that where their mom, usually it's the mom, brought them back and made them, have that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. I think for me, while I don't have an individual story like that, I just think that as I began to formulate at a very, very young age the thing that I thought I wanted to do, which is what I ultimately did, was serve the nation. Um, I always thought the idea of integrity was like fully baked into the idea of service. Like, how could you agree to serve the nation and at the same time not be a person of integrity? And again, it's one of the concepts that's just hammered home at the U.S. Naval Academy because the officer corps of our military is expected to be of the highest virtue and the highest integrity, and they just make sure that there are opportunities for you to understand the gravity of what it means to be a person of integrity, how important it is for you to exercise that character, because lives are in the balance and people ultimately will be counting on you to be truthful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last one. What's your go-to decision filter when things get messy?
I'm very much a person who tends towards action. Maybe even it's a good critique of my approach to things because I do not sit for very long on any one particular thing. And if things get messy, I feel it's necessary to make a decision and pick a path and start moving, so that you can figure out whether or not that's the right answer. And rather than paralysis, I've seen so many executives. I've seen people in leadership roles and leadership positions be stifled by paralysis of decision making, whereas I'm very, very much inclined towards just simply making a decision in messy environments and moving forward because you can get mired in paralysis of decision making for so long that no decision is made, and I think that's worse than making a bad decision in some instances. And so this bias towards action is something that I carry with me, and I don't know that I can change that at this point in my professional career. It's worked for me. It's not always the right answer, but I always feel much more comfortable moving in a direction rather than being pushed in a direction.
I'm in your camp. Just that analysis paralysis used to drive me crazy.
Yeah,
Let's just
yeah,
try something. Let's move. And even if we fail, let's
yeah.
fail fast and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how many people, and you get to see people's comfort zones with that concept that you just conveyed. I'm amazed at the number of people who don't feel comfortable with that as an approach to things. And I saw a lot of that in my 6 years as an executive in the technology world. There are a lot of folks who are afraid to fail because I think what they're afraid of is they don't want to make the wrong decision, which is understandable. But they also have to understand that their paralysis creates paralysis for a litany of people. Other people are waiting on you to make that decision so that they can then get their stuff in order and figure out a way to conduct business or to get a particular job done. And it's interesting to me how many folks are sort of I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance, but maybe they're just not aware that paralysis can be harmful to the entire team as opposed to, again, and maybe this is military in me, they make a decision and move on
Mhm.
because, sitting on it doesn't help matters either.
No, absolutely not. Was that a tough transition moving out of public service into the private sector?
It wasn't for me, and I actually talked about this either in a blog or a posting recently. I've always had the mindset that I'm a person that gets things done, and I think that characteristic is valuable no matter where you go. It certainly was valuable to me in my career in public service. I was known as someone who got things done, and I take that same mentality into the private sector. And people are amazingly and thankfully, that's a trait that's not completely well shared. There are plenty of people who like to wax poetic around the theory around things rather than acting on things. And it goes back to the conversation we just had around the bias towards action. Um, the transition wasn't difficult for me, but I understand how it can be difficult for a lot of people who come from public service, because that bias towards action is not often shared by
Mhm.
people in public service, because they're so regimented in the decision making that people in that environment too are afraid of making the wrong decision. And so oftentimes they don't make any decision, which is sometimes a safe bet in public service rather than making a particular decision. And I was just never comfortable with that.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that kind of made me stick out in public service.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's jump into that book you mentioned earlier, your book about leadership for youngsters. What
Yeah.
what led to writing that book in the first place?
I had a point in my career where I had to spend a significant amount of time away from my family. My wife was at the time also a special agent in the FBI. We're both retired FBI agents. So there she is managing the home life with our two boys at the time. In order for me to promote up the ranks, I had to go move back to Washington, D.C. and be separated from my family for a year, right? To our veterans out there, they're like, what's the big deal? We're separated from our families all the time. In an environment like the FBI, again, a professional environment, this was a little bit of a stark decision, and I'm thankful my wife agreed to it and allowed me to do that. And yeah, there were times I got an opportunity to come back home, or a couple of times I flew the family out. But I mean, it was 12 months of continuous me living somewhere else, and my family being in place. And so my boys were very young at the time, and I thought to myself, how could I have the impact on my children that my father had on me? How could I then expand that impact to maybe more people than just my two boys? And that's where the concept of the book came from. I was like, maybe I can codify this. Maybe I can write a little bit of it down. And so when I wrote the book, it was written with an eye towards the audience that would be reading this would be someone in the sixth or seventh grade, some young person who, like me, picked up a book that maybe had some concepts that might have been a little bit over your head. But if you read through it, even if the concepts are a little bit over your head, you're going to pick up some of the things there. So it was written with an eye towards the audience that would eventually be reading it. There's there's a character in the book, Xavier, who's sort of the centerpiece, and he's got a young dog that hangs out with him, a dog a dog named Kobe, and I take him through the leadership characteristics that I think can be helpful to folks, and these are leadership characteristics that I got from my time in the Marines, and I wrote the book with stories around, again, trying to be relevant for what they might be experiencing at that particular age, but then aligning it towards things like integrity, and other characteristics that are important for people to understand. Even if you just read and you hear the concepts, I think there's value in that.
What are some ways that parents or grandparents can plant those seeds of leadership in their young children?
Yeah, I think looking for those cues and opportunities to provide those lessons, little things like what you described, the situation with your mom, identifying that there was you didn't do it because you were bad. You did it because you didn't understand the system, the economic system, and something needed to be explained to you. But there was also an integrity thing there that if you did know that you had to pay for those things, that there's a lesson to be taught there. So looking for those instances of teaching. Don't assume that because your kids are young that they can't grasp concepts like that, because they can. And the more you talk about them and the more you reiterate those concepts to them, the more likelihood that it's going to lay a foundation and be ground into them as part of who they are. And then you let the roots take root and the flower blossom the way that it's going to blossom, but you got to plant the seeds. You got to help them to understand that it's important to maintain these characteristics. Courage, courage of your convictions, and something's wrong, that you step forward and say that something's wrong, right? That you have the confidence in your own abilities to bring knowledge to the table if you have knowledge, and just be forthright in your dealings with people. There's a famous saying around all of the things that I needed to know in life were taught to me in the playground, right? Like about being nice to people, and giving way, and not being selfish, and this kind of thing. And some of those things definitely carry into adult life, and they're taught at a very, very early age. And I think that I believe the corollary of this, by the way, that if you have people acting in bad faith in the world, those are things that they learned, that it was acceptable to be that way as young people, either through explicit or implicit instruction, that they were given the thought that it's okay to take advantage of people or it's okay to be bad. And they saw it somewhere because I don't think that it's the natural state of people to assume that they're going to be that.
It's funny you mentioned the playground. So it was the playground where I got that beating, but it was also it was also that same playground. So this was, I guess, like 4th or 5th grade. I was on the top of the monkey bars with my best friend Brad, and we were having a spitting contest. So we were seeing
Mhm.
how far we could spit from the top of the monkey bars. The principal calls us into his office, and we're like, "Oh boy, what did we do?" And he has a conversation with us about leadership. And he tells us, guys, other kids are looking up to you. They're seeing you. And what are you displaying as leadership? You're spitting off of the monkey bars. And we never thought
Yeah.
anything about it until he had that conversation with us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So he took advantage of the opportunity to teach a lesson, and I
Yeah.
think the more we can do that, the more we can expect our kids to turn out with, at the very least, the foundational pieces that they need to get through life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what challenges do you have coming up, MK? You mentioned running. Do you do any races?
I don't do any races, and in fact, it's interesting. I've been a So since going to the Naval Academy, and serving in the Marines and the FBI, I've had a love-hate relationship with running nearly my entire adult
Yeah.
life. I don't do any races, but I definitely at the ripe age of 56 have come to the understanding that it's, for me, one of the best exercises that I can do continuously, even though my knees are terrible. I've got foot pain. I have to I run through it, to
Hmm.
be honest, because I know that the result of it is I feel much better as a human being after a
Yeah.
good run, and so I keep doing it. I don't do overkill. If I do 3 runs in a week, that's probably the max for me. I probably can't do more than that, but they're good, 3.5 mile runs, and I feel good afterwards. So I'm gonna keep doing it
So as far as challenges
until I
go, the
until I
challenges of
can't.
starting up your business is enough for you?
You know what? It's interesting, Rob. When I signed up to start my own business, I know that I knew it was going to be challenging. What I didn't know is that it was going to occupy my mind 7 days a week. I have to actually carve out time not to do business things because it's so overwhelmingly demanding when you start a business that it, you know the list of things that begin to accumulate that need to get done and have to be done, it all falls on you as the purveyor of this idea. Yeah, I've hired a couple of people and they're doing great jobs at doing their work, but at the end of the day, if something succeeds or fails, and especially fails, it's because of something that I likely did not do or didn't enforce or didn't do in the way that I should. So, I mean, there's an immense amount of urgency associated with it, immense amount of pressure, and the way that I compensate for that is I'm engaged in it nearly all day, every day. And again, I'm grateful that I'm in a position to be able to do it, and I hope that once the flywheel effect takes and I got a decent pipeline, and once things are running smoothly, that maybe I can throttle back a little bit. But I my expectation is that once you start to see success, it'll probably get even worse. I don't I because because then you'll have this urgency. You bring on more people, right? You start building the ranks, and you grow and you scale. I think there's a whole different urgency that comes with success. So I'm anticipating that, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for me and the team at Apogee.
Well, I'm glad you have an outlet like running. You need
Yeah,
something that gets your mind and your body out of the office and just
yeah,
you're probably thinking about work, you're thinking about strategy and projects while you're
yeah.
running, but it is still it's a release, I think, for the body.
Yeah, you bet. And in fact, I make some good decisions, I think, while I'm running it. It provides a kind of clarity. You're able to like put away all of the ancillary things that might interfere with decision making. And during the course of a 3 mile run, I'll wrestle with a topic and then get to the end of the run and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do about such and such. It definitely provides some clarity. And these acoustic drums behind me also is my other outlet. And from time to time, I'll jump on these drums for about an hour and a half or so, and just bang away. And that gives me a little bit of release, but nothing's like running. Nothing.
I had to ask you about the drums. I was you obviously see those in the background. Have you been playing for a long time?
My father, my leadership guru, was a professionally trained jazz musician, and he put a set of acoustic drums in front of me at the age of 5, and I played off and on my entire life. So I don't play for a band or anything like that. I'm just a hobbyist. I love music, like a lot of music. I have a fairly eclectic taste, ranging everywhere from traditional jazz all the way through rock and R&B and just a ton of things that I like. And so I'll just put on tunes here that have great jazz and or drum beats to them, and I'll just drum away for a little bit, and that tends to help me get through some things.
Oh, very cool. Would your dad practice at home, or would you go to any of his
Oh yeah, yeah. No, he practiced at home every night, in fact, and many of my childhood memories are of him practicing in. And I was telling my kids the other day, my dad had the whole reel to reel setup and the turntable and just hundreds of albums, most of them jazz oriented. And he was his favorite instrument was a saxophone. He played saxophone, he played the flute, but his favorite was the saxophone, and he would put on John Coltrane or he'd put on Charlie Parker, and he would. My dad could transpose music. Do you know what transposition is?
No.
He could listen to a song and then write the notes, listen
Wow.
to it and write the notes, which was a and I just have this image and memory of him being able to do that. So he would, on a reel to reel, keep playing parts of a tune back and forth and then continue to write the notes. And he would write it out so that he could then go play it and practice it using the written notes. And I don't know. I'm sure there's a ton of people today that do that, but it's definitely a firm memory that I have of his ability to be able to transpose music like that. It's a very unique skill. Um, my dad was a super smart guy. I'm wondering. I did not get his mathematical and intelligence genes. That's for sure. They probably skipped a generation with me. But yeah, he professionally trained musician. He would practice almost every night, and I literally, as a young kid, would fall asleep to him playing the saxophone. I'm downstairs in the basement. I just remember waking up the next morning and in my bed, which means he had to carry me up the stairs to go to bed. But yeah, he would practice every night. So music just was a part of my youth in a really really big way.
Wow, that's so cool. And do you still love listening to jazz music?
I do. I do.
Yeah.
In fact, there are some songs, and a lot. It doesn't take a psychologist to know. A lot of this has to do with the connectivity to my father. But there's some songs that I hope I will be listening to for the remainder of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Well, MK, last question. Any words of advice to others that are listening that are going through their own challenges right now in life or in business or in their career?
Yeah, just remember the tough times don't last forever, right? It may seem like you're in the midst of something that's hard at the moment. But if you continue to stay on course and do the things that you know are right in terms of contributing to a positive outcome, then in all likelihood, you're going to get through that tough period and see yourself on the other end. I've become a big fan of the term resilience, which is something that I don't recall being utilized so heavily as I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, but I do that term resilience. I think applies to a lot of the things that we do in life, and I just feel like right now it's my go-to term because it embodies sort of everything that I'm experiencing at the moment. Be resilient. Continue to do what you know is right, and you're going to see the dividends of the right outcomes eventually. None of this happens overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. MK, thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation. Fascinating
Thanks,
history.
Rob. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing all about it. And I want to wish you courage and resilience and success in your new venture.
I appreciate it, Rob. Thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing me in and have this conversation. It's been fun.